Herodotus does give us an interesting story about a eunuch who was owned by Xerxes, and he became a very powerful member of the staff of Xerxes. In the ancient world, eunuchs were like very useful people. They were bought as slaves, but they often ended up becoming very powerful, especially when they worked for kings and queens. There's this one who worked for Xerxes. Herodotus tells us that his name was Hermotimus. Now, Hermotimus had been and the reason I'm telling you this story is because this Hermotimus ended up punishing the person who made him a eunuch in a very interesting way. This Hermotimus was bought by a certain guy known as Panionius. Panionius was a guy from Chaos. He was a business person, and uh, one of the businesses he was running was buying slaves. He bought slaves and then sold them. Often he will turn these slaves into eunuchs before selling them. And Hermotimus was captured at war. He was a Pedesian. That's the tribe Herodotus tells us he belonged to. And this was a tribe that occupied a certain part of what we know today as Turkey. And also, Chios was another part of what we know today as Turkey, where this trader came from. Hermotimus was captured at war, and then he was sold to this guy. And this guy, that's the business he did. He bought slaves. He didn't care whether they were captured at war or where they came from. If they were the market, he bought them. He was just a business person, and he sold them. And often he turned them into eunuchs, because turns out when when he turned them into eunuchs, it looks like he fetched a little more. So he sold this guy. This guy was a young man then. He sold him to someone who lived in Sardis, and that person at some point sent Hermotimus to Persia as a gift to the king. I suspect the person he was sent to as a gift was Darius. And when Darius died and his son Xerxes took over, Hermotimus became one of the properties he inherited. Now, over time, Hermotimus became very close to Xerxes. He became a very trusted servant, and he would be assigned very critical tasks. And one time, at the time when Xerxes was coming to Europe to go to Athens and punish the Athenians, Hermotimus was sent on a certain errand to represent the king, and he went. And while there, he runs into this guy who sold him, Panionius. He runs into him, and they started having a conversation, and he recognizes him, and they started having a conversation. They start talking, and he talks to him in a very friendly way. And of course, Panionius realized that this guy had become a very powerful um, um, courtesan, as they are called, people who work within the palace, and then they somehow, because they are close to power, they end up becoming very influential. So he realizes this guy is very influential in the palace of Xerxes, and Hermotimus takes this as an opportunity, and he tells him, you know what, maybe you should come and stay in Sardis. I'll make sure you're comfortable. Just come with your entire family. I'll make sure you're comfortable. You'll have a place to stay, and I'll make things work for you in the city. And Panionius was happy about this, and he took the offer. Little did he know that this was a plan to punish him for what he had done to Hermotimus many years back. So Panionius goes to Sardis with his family, his wife, his kids. Herodotus tells us that there were 4 sons. He doesn't mention how many daughters. Probably he had daughters. There's a reason why he mentions the 4 sons. And they go to Sardis, and while there, Hermotimus was very powerful, because when he reached Sardis, when Panionius reached Sardis, Hermotimus had him arrested and taken before him. Uh, this is a eunuch, it's basically a slave, but he had those powers. And he told him, you know what, I know you as a person who made a living by doing the most evil things. You took people, slaves, and you basically castrated them, made them eunuchs, and then you sold them for a profit. And I think it's time you paid for it. And he ordered him to take his 4 sons and make them eunuchs right there in front of Hermotimus. And Panionius had no option. He did that. He made his sons eunuchs. And then Hermotimus told the sons they too had to do the same to their dad. And they made their dad a eunuch. And Hermotimus avenged himself. Yeah, so this is a story that Herodotus tells us as a tangent, as he tells us about the affairs and how Xerxes ran his affairs, and then he mentions this Hermotimus, who he trusted very much. In fact, the reason why he mentions him in the first place is because when when Xerxes realized that things were going wrong for the Persians in Europe and he wanted to escape, he assigned a certain lady Artemisia to take care of his kids, to transport them to Asia. And alongside Artemisia, he also assigned Hermotimus to help with that, to make the sons comfortable as they were being evacuated to Asia.